There's a few things going on in the property market. It has been a buyer's market for a while now. Great news for those wanting to get on the ladder, but not so great for those wanting maximum dollar for their bricks and mortar. Latest figures point to a possible end of the current buyer's market, but don't break out the champagne just yet. Also, Reserve Bank data shows during the past decade, the average new first home mortgage has increased from about 300,000 to more than 550,000, and it's estimated 59% of New Zealanders are paying more than 30%, a third of their household income to their home loan costs, and nearly a quarter spend more than half their income. And that's if you can even get a mortgage. Mortgage brokers are frustrated by the diabolical time, well, their words, being taken to process home loan applications. They say in some cases it's meant they've turned their clients away. They're saying the bank staff are turning around direct applications to banks more quickly, which makes it hard for them to do business. So for more on these stories, it's always great to have on the show PPC, that's property and political commentator, Ashley Church. Hello, Ashley.
Hello, Leah. How are you?
You enjoy the PPC? This is I've told Kelly that's your new that's your new name. It's your moniker.
Very good. I'm gonna put it on business. I don't actually use business cards, but if I did, I'd put that on them. So
yeah, that's a good question. Who actually has business cards anymore?
No one.
Do you remember when you stopped using yours? Because you must have had them.
20 years ago. I mean, I used to keep getting them printed for a long time, but I never used them. So I probably still got them printed up until about 15 years ago, but realised I wasn't using them and didn't bother. So I reckon if you're under, well, I'm 60, so I was good, maybe I'm not being unfair, but I was going to say if you're under 50, you're definitely not using them, and if you're under 60, you're probably not. So I don't know.
I keep finding them all over the place. I haven't used them for probably the same, and I find them in old old purses, old handbags. Just
they're
slipped
kind of like a snapshot. They're a snapshot in time. They sort of remember. They take you back. You see them, and they kind of they immediately take you back to when you were at that particular role or whatever it was you were doing. So they were good in that respect.
I know.
Gone, Leah, gone.
I know, and I designed it myself, and I had my little picture on it, and yeah, I had a little sassy picture of my face. I was like, wow, that was a long time ago. Look at you. Anywho, but I just thought of that. Yeah, good old business cards. Okay, first up, Ash, early signs are emerging that the glut of homes for sale that has dominated the housing market for the last year may finally be moving back to a position where supply and demand are better balanced. Would you agree?
Well, yeah. Well, I was just listening to you in the intro. Actually, there was some interesting stuff there. So for example, the information from the Reserve Bank indicating that the average mortgage is sort of getting up toward doubling over the last 10 years. Well, of course it has. I mean, house prices have doubled, so mortgages are going to double. So nothing particularly unusual in that. And in fact, when you look at the percentage of income figures, that the proportion of income that's being devoted to the servicing of the mortgage, it's actually still relatively low at about a third. I mean, in the 80s and into the 90s, it was over half of the average household income. So, it's still pretty benign in that regard. However, with respect to your bigger question, it's a bit like, you remember those cartoons, sort of like Roadrunner, where the coyote was trying to sort of light a rocket and it wouldn't, and he'd light it and it would go out. And the market's a bit like that at the moment. The rocket's ready to take off, but the fuse keeps fizzing out for all sorts of reasons, and at some point it's going to take off, and it's going to take off into the atmosphere. So it's just really a question of when that is. We're kind of there. In fact, we've been there for a while. It's just a question of how quickly that's going to take off. And I think that probably that added ingredient of lower interest rates, which is upon us now, is the final piece of that puzzle.
Hey, although I will ask you though, because when you said, of course, mortgage rates are higher than it was 10 years ago, blah, 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 because houses have gone up. But, not that you said blah, 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 actually, that was me. But I would just say it is worse for them because, yes, house prices have risen, but far greater in relation to incomes.
Yeah, they have, but the thing that you've got to constantly stress this, the thing you've got to look at is not what the income is and not what the house price is and not what the interest rate is, but how those three things work together, and it comes down to how much of your household income. So what that means is, if you go back to the 80s as a sort of an extreme example, it was taking well over 50% of the average household income to service the mortgage on a home. Currently, and just from those figures you just gave me, for first home buyers, it's about a third, about 33% of household income. So putting aside what they're earning and putting aside what the house is costing, they're required to take less of their household income to service that mortgage in real dollars. So they're actually better off. It's not about the headline number. It's about what percentage of their total income does it actually require to service that mortgage, and that number's lower.
Hey, I don't know if I've asked you this in the past. I probably have, it's never just one question. But is it better to take the 30 years or however long they've given you? Or are you one of those, or would you say, no, pay it off as soon as you can? Because my thing is, 30 years, but you can still have a good life in that time, if you do pay it off.
I'm right at the other extreme. My argument would be, and it's more difficult to do this with your own home than it is with property investments, but my argument would be you should never, ever pay any principal on your loan at all. And people will be horrified when they say that. You don't even,
I'm
and
horrified.
Say, oh my God. Yeah, well, the reason for that is if it's true that house prices double every 10 or so years, so you've got a house that's worth 100,000, in 10 years it's worth 200,000, in 10 years it's worth 400,000, 10 years after that it's worth 800,000. That original $100,000 loan relative to what it's worth at the end of that mortgage period is peanuts. In fact, for most people, it will be the equivalent of something that they could probably just pay out of their bank account, because that's what happens with inflation over time. And if I look at my mum, for example, my mum and dad built a house in 1971 in Napier. Cost them, I think, $33,000 to build it in Purumae. You all know Purumae. And over the next 30 years, struggled to pay interest and principal to get that finally paid off. They would have been better just to have paid the interest on that loan, and after 15, 20, 25 years, just gone and paid that 33 grand back, which would have been much easier to do. You understand my point?
Yes.
Much easier to do 10 or 20 years later than it was at the time they were actually doing it. But as much as I say that, it's really hard for people to get their head around it, because we've got this culture in the country that says you must pay off your mortgage as quickly as possible, and it's hard to break people out of that mindset.
Having said that, though, and I get that with your story of your mum, because my parents were the same. They bought their house for $60,000 back in I can't remember. I was very young, but does that 10-year double thing work when we're sitting on? Say I bought a house this year that was $1 million, right? 10 years it's 2. You're saying in another 10 years it's 3. But
example,
But I don't know if you've bought in an area that in 30 years' time could sustain or go, these houses are worth $4 million. Really?
Well, yeah, they are. And so I'll give you a really good example of that. So I remember standing in 2010, 2011 on Tearangi Road and Botany Downs in Auckland. And there was houses there that were selling for about $500,000, those big 2-story McMansions that they were building there. And I remember saying to somebody at the time, these will be worth over $1 million in 10 years' time. And them saying to me, don't be ridiculous. Nobody would ever pay $1 million. And of course, now they're worth well over $1 million. And they'll be worth over $2 million 10 years from now, and so on. Because what we forget is we tend to base it on the circumstances as they are now and what money's worth now. We forget the impact that inflation has on the value of things over time. So will they be worth $4 million? Absolutely. In the same way that $500,000 house is worth $1 million now, and that would have been unbelievable to people 10 or 15 years ago.
What happens if we've just built so many houses in the 10 years that, doesn't that affect obviously the price of your house, because there's now more houses to choose from?
Well, you've had 40 years of this phenomenon, and it hasn't impacted on that equation one iota, so no.
Okay,
the answer is no, yeah.
No, yeah. Look, I think that's, we've got a rental. I've got 2 more years for it to double, because it's not worth double at the moment. And I'm 8 years in.
But remember, we've just been through this weird 4 or 5 year period since 2020, which was created entirely by the Reserve Bank. It had nothing to do with the normal operation of the market. It was and it's not just here, but worldwide. So we've had this really, really strange time that there is no comparison for in recent history. So this isn't, the point I'm making is what's happened since COVID is not an indication of how the market works.
Sure.
It's overwhelming interference from the Reserve Bank, which will disappear, and we'll get back to some degree of
I must admit, before, we bought it about 4.5 years before COVID, and it was on track for what you were saying, and then now the wheels have fallen off slightly.
And that's why.